Shabbos Parshas B'Shalach, Shabbos Shira. This week's Parsha contains song. It contains the big and perhaps the most famous song in all of Tanakh, which is what we refer to as Oz Yashir, the song that Moshe and the Bnei Yisrael sang when they saw that they were delivered from the hands of the Egyptians, and they saw the dead bodies of the Egyptians on the edge of Al Sfas Hayam, on the edge of the sea. And there's another song, considerably shorter, but distinct, which is that of Miriam and the women. We're going to start with that one. This is in Perek Tesvav, Pasuk Chaf. That's 15:20. Vatikach Miriam hanaviyah achos Aharon es hatok biyada, and Miriam, the prophetess, sister of Aaron, took a tambourine, or a hand drum, in her hand. Vatetzena kol hanoshim achareha b'supim ubvim cholos, and all the women followed her with tambourines and with dances. Now, right out of the box, we have to ask ourselves, why is it that the women get musical instruments? The men don't. There's no mention in Az Yashir Moshe B'nai Yisrael Sashir Azos Hashem Lemor. When Moshe and the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, sang their song, there is no mention of instruments. What's going on? That's number one. Number two is a technical question, which is that the Shira, the long Shira, that Moshe sings, Moshe and Bnei Yisrael, ends with the verses, Hashem Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed, God will rule forever and ever. Then there's an intervening verse here, and our question is going to be, why does it belong here? It reads as follows, Ki va sus paro b'rechbo u'v'farsha bayam, for the horses of Pharaoh went in with his chariots and with his horsemen into the sea. Vayoshev Hashem alehem es mehayam, and Hashem brought back the waters of the sea on them. Uvnei Yisrael halchu b'yabasha b'soch hayam, and the children of Israel walked on dry land in the midst of the sea. Now, we already covered this ground. This was already at the beginning of the Shira. In the previous chapter, that is Yudalit 14, Pasuk Chavtes, it says, Uvnei Yisrael halchu b'yabasha b'soch hayam, and the children of Israel walked on dry land in the midst of the sea. So, what's going on? And the verse before that, it says, Vayashuva Maayan vaychasu es harecha v'saparashim l'cholchei paro b'rim achrayim bayam. Lo nishar b'hem adachad. The waters returned, covered the chariots and the horsemen, all of Pharaoh's army that went after him into the sea. So we've already established that the Egyptian army with its chariots and its riders went into the sea, and there they ended. And the Shira ends with the declaration Hashem Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed. That's the climax of the Shira. So then, our question is: so how does it come to be that at the very end of this Shira, then there's another line which says, Ki va sus paro b'chbo u'v'farash bayam, for the horses of Paro went in with his chariots and with his horsemen into the sea, and Hashem brought the waters of the sea on them, and the children of Israel walked on dry land. It's recapitulating the exact same thing. So if you would say that it's part of the Shira, it may be a recapitulation, although it follows sequentially at the end. But according to most commentaries, this is not part of the song, but rather it's part of the narrative. And that makes our question even stronger. Why do we have the narrative that's repeating itself? So Rav Schwab suggests an answer to that, which is that there was a difference in the strength of the faith between the men and the women. And this is recorded in the Gemara in Psachim, Kuf Yud Ches, which says that the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, and one might infer specifically the men, were Katane Emuna. They were of little faith. What does that mean, that they were of little faith? Well, it says that Yisrael Shabbat Sador mi Katane Emuna Hayu. This is Reb Nosson says. It says, Va'amru, Kishem Shanu Olim Mitzad Echad, Kach Mitzrayim Olim Mitzad Acher. So the men were fearful. They were afraid. They said they were paranoid. They said maybe just like we went into the sea, we didn't actually go into the sea, we went into the dry land in the sea, but we came out on the other side. So perhaps the Egyptians, even though they're in the water now, they'll come out the other side. It's not a terribly rational fear. The distinction being that the Bnei Yisrael walked on dry land and the Egyptians were drowning in the sea. But nevertheless, they couldn't shake this fear. And correspondingly, the Gemara characterizes it as Ketane Amuna. They were of little faith. The women, on the other hand, did not wait. Oh, and then it's only after the Bnei Yisrael saw the disposition of the Egyptians and saw Vayar Yisrael es Mitzrayim meis al sfas hayam. It's only after the children of Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore, then they sang. Apparently, according to the Gemara, only once they saw that the Egyptians were, shall we say, dead and buried, not quite buried, but they were on the edge of the sea. Then, Vayar Yisrael es hayad hagdola asher asa Hashem b'Mitzrayim. Then Israel saw the great work that Hashem had done to the Egyptians, and then Vayiru ha'am es Hashem, and then the people feared God, and then Vayaminu b'Hashem Moshe, and then they believed in Moshe, in Hashem and in Moshe. Contrast that with the lead up to the Shira of Miriam. There it says, after the close of the Shira of Moshe, Hashem Yimlok Lo Amad, Moshe and the men, then it's almost like a rewind and a setup. First, the Torah sets up the Shira of the men. We covered that. Then it sets up the Shira of the women, the song of the women. And it says, Ki va sus paro b'rchbo v'shabayam. When the horses of Paro went in with its chariots and with its horsemen into the sea, and Hashem brought back the waters of the sea on them, and the children of Israel walked on dry land in the midst of the sea, then Miriam took the tambourine and started singing. She and the women who followed her did not need to see the Egyptians come out. They knew the work was done. They knew God had delivered. Not only did they know it then, but Rashi explains, Muftachos hayut tzadkanios shebador, shakadosh baruch hu osa lahem nisim v'otziu tupim mimitzrayim. It says that the righteous women in that generation were confident that Hashem would perform miracles for them. And so they prepared. What did they prepare? They brought tambourines. They brought musical instruments. They were ready to rejoice. They knew the time would come for them to rejoice. This was the difference between the emunah, the bitachon, the confidence, the faith that the women had, in contrast to the lack of confidence and the lack of faith that the men had until it was in their eyes and it was an inescapable conclusion. In fact, the Gemara in Pesachim says that bischar noshim tzidkanios nigalu, that it was in the merit and the reward of the righteous women that the Jews were redeemed. That it was the bitachon and the emunah of the women. One might say, with some level of backing in the Torah, and we see this concerning the Egal Azav also, that the women generally were on a higher spiritual level than the men. And there are Meforshim who say that when it says, Vatetzena kol hanoshim achareha, and all the women followed her, it doesn't only mean the women of that time, but it means the women for all time follow in the footsteps of Miriam. Have a good Shabbos.